Welcome to the WaterGait alignment transfer video. After you've made your successful duplication, you'll see that you've got a nice uniform transition between the socket and the formed DupliCone. If there are any gaps, definitely take a picture and email them to us so that we can see how that it fits together. Here's your prosthesis, the cups, mixing stick pad, and tall transfer jig, and the long transfer tube, as well as the plaster and the foot plate. Now the foot plate slides into the base of the transfer jig after you've screwed the legs in. Now we take the long transfer tube and slide it directly up as high as it will go into the transfer jig, and then we'll just very lightly tighten the large wing nut so that it holds it in place. You can see there's plenty of room to slide underneath with your prosthesis. And there's the cloth at the end of the tube. Now we take a pad and stick it underneath the heel. This will help the foot or the prosthesis stand up in place. If it doesn't want to stand up on its own, you can help it with your hand or some tape. Probably the best thing would be the hand. You can see it's not quite aligned perfectly here, so we're going to slide it over a little bit more. There we go. So you want that pipe to be go right down the middle of that DupliCone. Here you can see we've allowed it to go all the way down to the distal end and touch it. So we don't actually want it to touch in the final version, so what we're going to do is have you lift up the pipe just about 1/4 of an inch. There's too much, too little, just right. Go ahead and lightly tighten the wing nut again to hold it in place, and then get out a Sharpie marker or a pen or a pencil and draw that top line as well as the gap there so that we can get the rotation right. Okay, now we're simply going to remove the tall alignment fixture from the foot, and like I say, if it doesn't stand, you can have someone hold it. For purposes of the video, we had one that stood up on its own. Now you don't have to fill the little cup with water. As long as it's mostly full, you'll end up with the right amount of plaster. Now the theory behind plaster is you mix the dry into the liquid. You're always pouring plaster into water, not the other way around. So after you've measured out the water, you pour into plaster, and you want it to look a little bit like an island sticking out of the ocean. So you've got a little bit of there you see a little pile of plaster sticking out of the water. That's a good starting place. It'll probably be a little thin. You can add a little bit more, but you don't want to make it so thick as a milkshake or something so that you can't pour it. So just mix it until it's nice and liquidy and pourable, but not so thick that you can't pour it. The one other step that we do so that you're not waiting for hours for the plaster to cure is that we're going to take some salt and add about 1/2 teaspoon of salt into the plaster and mix that for another 30 seconds or so, and then pour the plaster into the bottom of the DupliCone. Here you can see the consistency of the plaster. Not too thick, not too thin. Okay, now you want to pour the plaster directly into the center of the DupliCone. You don't want it to run down the side because you want most of it to be at the bottom. You don't have to scrape every last bit of plaster in. As long as you've got about 3/4 of an inch plaster down at the bottom, you're fine. Lift up your transfer jig, line up those back corners, and as long as everything hasn't moved and where it was before, see, we have not loosened that. The line looks straight, and you can see down into the DupliCone. Sure enough, the cloth is fitting into the liquid plaster, and then that'll make a nice good bond that will hold up so that we can transfer the alignment here. Now you take your Sharpie marker, try and keep the marker as vertical as possible, and draw around the toes, the sides, and the heel. Doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be perfect. As long as it's fairly even, the most important thing is to try and keep the marker fairly vertical. That way we get the most accurate drawing. Once the plaster has set, like I say, about 30 minutes later, you can take the alignment fixture off. You can see it will still stand, and the plaster has hardened. Now you have to remove the DupliCone from the prosthesis. Sometimes this is easy, sometimes it's a little difficult. If it's easy, it'll come out with your hands. If it's difficult, you just take a large pair of pliers and pull it out till it comes out. Here are the items that you'll be shipping back to us that we need to transfer the alignment. Now you'll notice after you've removed the DupliCone, the hardened plaster may not actually stick to the bottom of the DupliCone. That's perfectly fine. Here you can see it's very loose. There's little bits of plaster down in there. This is not a problem. We just simply turn it upside down, shake out the little bits of plaster, and revert it back together so where it fits, like a little puzzle piece. Make sure it fits in there, and then take some of the packing material paper and stuff it down into the gap, into that space, so that the pipe and the plaster and the DupliCone still maintain as a unit, to avoid the plaster breaking during shipping. And once you've got it all in there, then you'll find out that the pipe is fairly firmly in place, and stick everything back into the shipping box. Pack it tightly with the packing paper. You don't have to use all the packing paper, but take the return label, place it over the other label, and ship the box after dropping it off at UPS, and it'll come back to us. Obviously, email us if you have any questions.